Hello there, I'm Kafi Khan and welcome back to my Android tutorials. In the previous video, we talked about activities and layouts. If you haven't watched the video, please watch it. In today's video, we'll be talking about explicit intents. To understand explicit intents, we need to understand intents first. So what is an intent? Intent is like a glue between activities, or in another word, it allows you to interact between components within the same application or different applications. That gives us two different types of intents, explicit and implicit. Explicit intent explicitly defines which component is to be called. For example, going from activity A to activity B. Whereas implicit intent defines the action to be performed. For example, click a photograph or view an image. In today's video, as I told you earlier, we'll be learning about explicit intent. Well, to understand explicit intents, we'll be making a small project which will have two activities. Let's call the first activity login activity. It will have a form with two input fields and a login button. When the user hits the login button, the application goes to the second activity which shows welcome username. So, let's create a new project. Let's name our project Explicit Intents. Let's hit the next button. And we'll be keeping our minimum API 15. Why? We've talked in our previous videos that keeping the minimum SDK as API 15 means we're going to cover almost 100% of the devices running Android in the world. So let's hit the next button. We're going to start with an empty activity. Let's call our first activity login activity. Let's hit the finish button. Android Studio is building the project, so let's wait. The Gradle is built and our project is ready to go. Let's just close this notification, it's nothing. As you can see, this is our project structure. We've got some Java files, we've got some resources, and resources we've got layouts. So layouts will have our UI files, that is XML files. The values folder will have strings, colors. We've already talked about that. And the Java files will have our Java files. That is the functionality part. These two folders, Android test and test, we'll talk about that later. So let's begin. So first, the way I do my projects is I break it down into small steps. So what we're trying to achieve here is we're going to make an application with two activities, forms. So let's break it. So first we're going to need an activity with a form. So let's make a form first. Let's remove the constraint layout, which is going to go with a linear layout. If you ever wonder how I get these suggestions, when I type something, just do Ctrl plus space. So a form will have two fields, edit text, one for username and one for password, and we'll also have a button. So let's create our first edit text. With match parent, hide wrap content. Let's give it a hint. Let's define a hint in the string file. As you can see, the string file is in the values directory. So we've defined the first string. We've given it a name, hint username. Let's define it for password as well. And let's also define it for the button label. So second would be hint password. Let's call the third one label login button. Coming back to our XML file, let's give the hint username. And as you can see here in the preview, we've got an edit text with the hint username. So let's create another edit text for our password. Again, let's provide the hint password. So now, as you can see, it's giving me some error over here and we can't see a password. So let's see what it is. No orientation specified. As you can recall in the previous video when we were talking about linear layouts, we also talked that it requires an orientation field which can either be vertical or horizontal. So in our case, we're going to need it vertical. Orientation, vertical. Now as you can see, the error is gone and we can see both our edit texts. Now let's create the button. Match parent, height wrap content, and the text, label, login button. Now our first step is finished. We've created a form successfully. So now the second step is when the user hits the login button, take the username and send it to the next activity. So the second step would be to fetch that username when the user hits the login button. So let's do that. So as I told you earlier, for the functionality parts, we'll be defining it in the Java file. So somehow what we need is a variable which can get me the text input from this username and password field. So for that, we're gonna create an object of type edit text. Let's do that. Edit text, ed, username. Let's keep it a private field. Now we've defined an object, not a variable, sorry, it's an object. So let's initialize it. Ed username is equal to find view by id r.id.ed. We haven't defined the IDs yet. So let's go back to our XML file and define the IDs. The password, Similarly for button, let's define an ID, btn, login. So we've defined IDs for all three view items. So let's use that ID here, ed, username. So you must be wondering what this find view by ID does. So this is an inbuilt function of Android. What it does is, it returns the view corresponding to this ID. So we've got our ed username view in this object. Similarly, we'll be needing for the button, because when the user hits the button, then we're going to fetch the text from this edit text field. So let's create an object for the button field. Private button btn login. We've declared our variable, let's initialize it. Btn login is equal to, similarly, find view by id r.id.btn login. Well, so we've achieved this much so far. So now we have access to both our view items from the Java file. So what we want is when the user hits the login button. So what that means is we're going to somehow listen to that click event, right? So for that also we have got an inbuilt function from the Android. So let's use that. Return login dot set on click listener. New click listener. So as you can see, I've used this function set on click listener. What it does is whatever you define inside this on click function will be called whenever this button is hit. So in our second step, what we want to achieve is when the user hits the login button, we want that text from the username edit text field. So let's get that. For that, we'll need a string variable, string str username is equal to ed username dot get text to string. So now you see I've used another function, get text. This is also an inbuilt function. What it does is it gets the text from our edit text field, and as you can see it returns an editable type, but we want it to be string, so that's why we've used another inbuilt function to string. So what this code snippet does is it gets the text from the edit text fields and converts it into a string and stores it in a variable str username. So now that we've got the text in a variable str username, what we're going to need is, for the third step, another activity. As we can recall, the welcome activity. So let's go to project, right click on the Java, new, activity and empty activity. So let's call it welcome activity. Let's hit the finish button. Our activity is ready to use. So again, let's design the UI part first. And the second activity, all we're going to need is a text welcome username. So what we're going to use is a text field. Again, let's get rid of this constraint layout. Let's use a linear layout. Linear layout. Let's provide an orientation, say vertical, and provide and design a text field. Match parent, height wrap content. Let's give it an ID, txt, welcome. And our text view is ready. Let's provide it with a default string welcome. Let's define a new string. String name, let's say str welcome. Let's use this string here. Text welcome. So as you can see, in our UI we have a welcome text. Now a third step is done. So far what we've achieved is we've designed a form, we've handled the login button click. All we've got to do is now go from the activity A to activity B, which is from activity login to activity welcome. Here comes intent in the picture. So let's define an intent object. So how we define that is, let's see, intent, class name intent, object name, let's say intent is equal to new intent. We've created an intent object. It takes a to and from in the parameter if you want to go from one activity to another. So let's pass those. So we're going to go from login activity dot this to welcome activity dot class. So now we've defined an intent object which tells, okay, go from login activity to welcome activity. Remember, we also want to pass the data. And what is the data? This text field username. So let's do that. Intent dot put extra. Let's give a key, username, and pass a variable here. So now if you see this line, intent dot put extra x comma y, So put extra is an inbuilt function. What it does is it takes a key value pair and you can retrieve these values in your target activity using this key. So now we've defined an intent object, we've added the data. So let's start the activity. For that also we've got an inbuilt function, start activity, and we pass our intent to it. Start activity, and let's pass the intent. So far so good. We've completed a third step, which was when the user hits the login button, set one click lister, get the text from the username edit text, okay, this line, and then go from login activity to welcome activity and pass the data. Go from login activity to welcome activity and pass the data. So we've achieved that so far. Okay, let's go to our second activity, welcome activity. Here, we're going to retrieve the string, as I told you, that put extra field, we passed a key value pair. Okay, let's define a variable, string, str username is equal to get intent, get string extra, because we're passing a string. So this again is an inbuilt function, get intent. So whatever is the intent, we're getting that, and from that we're getting a string extra, and we're going to use the key which we defined here, which was username. So let's copy paste that. So now what the statement does is it gets the intent and gets the string extra value against the key username and stores it in a variable str username. So we've got the username from the previous activity and we just gotta set it to the layout. For that, again, we're gonna access this text view somehow from this Java file, and remember we've done that in the previous activity. For that, we're just gonna define an object of type text view. So let's do that. Try with text view txt welcome, and we've just defined it. So let's initialize it also. Txt welcome is equal to find view by id r.id.txt welcome. So we've defined this object txt welcome, and we're getting a view against our id txt welcome, which is this text view. So now, time for the final step. We just gotta set this value here. So let's do that. Txt welcome dot set text. Let's say welcome plus and a variable str username. That's all. So we've achieved our target. Let's build the application and see what it does. This application Visor is an extension of Google Chrome. You can download it. What it does is it extends your Android smartphone's screen on your desktop so that we can see it. Okay, let's find the device. Here. Let's select it. As you can see, okay, it's connecting. As you can see, my smartphone's screen is projected here. Let's run our application. As you can see, the Gradle is building and it's saying Gradle build running. So this is just building the application and it will run on my smartphone. Okay, as you can see, our application is running, and this was our first activity, which was login activity. It has a form with two fields, username, password, and a login button. So let's see what it does. Let's give it a username, say Kafi. Let's give it some password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4, 5. And let's hit the login button. And our next activity is visible, which is welcome activity, and it shows me the message welcome Kafi. So that's all we wanted to achieve, and this is how explicit intent works. It tells your application to go from activity X to activity Y. That's all for today. If you have any doubts, any questions, feel free to drop a comment and we'll discuss about that. And if you need to access the code, the GitHub repository link is already in the description below. Just hit the site and see. And if you need any other help, again, feel free to drop a comment. See you in the next video.